Welcome back to Mainstream PC, everyone. My name is Julian, and today I'll be talking to you about consoles, which has nothing to do with PCs, you'd say, uh, potentially, but actually it does impact PC or PC gaming in a major way. So we'll have a quick look at the leaks of the Xbox Series X specifications that were just leaked not even a day ago, I believe. And let's just have a quick rundown of what these specs are, and then we'll talk about what that means and how it compares to current generation hardware. So it was leaked at that the APU, the combined graphics and CPU chip on the Xbox Series X, is a 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPU running at 3.8 gigahertz. I'm not sure if that's an average. They say each core is somewhat custom. Let's see if maybe they have one or two cores that run at higher frequency just to push frame rates. Let's see how much more detail we get about that in the future. It has a GPU that can perform at 12 teraflops. We'll talk about teraflops in a moment. And running on the RDNA 2.0 architecture with 52 compute units running at 1825 megahertz. It also comes with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, 10 of which is limited to 560 gigabytes per second and 6 of which is limited to 336 gigabytes per second. And it comes with an SSD, an NVMe PCIe 4.0 SSD at that, with 1 terabyte of storage. So that's gonna increase performance by quite a bit when it comes to loading times. And they do say that there's the target will be 4K native 60 frames per second support. So let's have a quick talk about each individual section. Let's talk about the 3.8 gigahertz 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPU. So essentially, yes, it's a Zen 2 CPU that runs at a lower frequency, but actually higher base frequency than, let's say, a 3700X or even a 3600, which boosts up to 4.2 gigahertz. So I'm not sure if these chips will boost. I doubt it, probably because for thermal capacity of or TDP output to keep the thing cool with the GPU also running in there. Maybe, as said, they might have one or two cores that might run at a higher frequency just to keep that frame counter somewhere higher. Let's see what happens there, but pretty cut and dry, that part. The 12 teraflop GPU, on the other hand, with the RDNA 2.0 architecture is quite interesting. So 12 teraflops. Teraflops is essentially the computing power, the render power of the GPU. Let's say in layman's terms, it's not the overall measure for everything, but it's a pretty good indication of what graphics processor can do in games, especially. And when we look at 12 teraflops, we're talking about slightly higher performance than an RTX 2080 Super, which performs out of the box without overclocking it or anything at about 11.5 teraflops, according to TechPowerUp.com. Please visit their website. They have a great database, a lot of information there. So essentially, if you have a 2080 Super, you're already in the ballpark of next generation console performance. But let's talk a little bit further. 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory means it's shared memory. So 10 gigabytes running at a higher bandwidth or throughput is indicative that the 10 gigabyte is meant for the graphics processing, while the 6 gigabyte is that is limited to 336 gigabyte per second is intended as like a RAM, like how we would use RAM on a regular computer on a PC. And of course the SSD, which we don't really need to talk about in detail. For me, this means anyone who's looking to buy hardware now to kind of like have a gaming rig should really look closely at these specs, because development of games is primarily still done for consoles. And there's of course ports to PC. There's actually cross-platform development as well. So we're looking at just an average kind of like target that developers might be focusing on. So next generation hardware this is what it can deliver. So even if PC hardware might make strides in graphics performance, let's say Ampere really increases performance by how much the leaks are saying. We're still looking at development being done for this kind of hardware, which means that if you have, or if you're building a gaming PC right now, you should be looking at least hitting this type of hardware if you want to keep it for, let's say, 3-4 years to run your games well. And by well, I mean don't mean ultra settings necessarily at I don't know, highest resolutions, but running them well. Let's say high settings or medium settings at higher resolutions, or high settings at slightly lower resolutions. And they say that this thing is targeting 4K native 60 frame support. Let's see about that. I mean, 12 teraflops is nothing to scoff at, but I'm not sure how realistic this really is. With future games may become more demanding to render and more complex. Let's see, but it will be kept in spec because they need to run on these consoles, right? And hopefully within spec, and actually hitting that 4K 60 frames per second. But then again, games are also more optimized for consoles. Yeah, and like specifically developed for that hardware, while your PC hardware might vary all over the spectrum, so it's hard to develop something for that runs at the same like efficiency or performance. But yeah, if you already have an 8-core 16-thread CPU like a 9900K or 3700X from AMD or anything above that, you have a graphics card that performs on par with a 2080 Super. There's not a lot of them out there. It's just the 2080 Super really, and the 2080 Ti that perform on par or above. But there are a bunch of graphics cards that perform just under. So if you have, like, let's say still a 1080 Ti or 2070 Super or anything above that, I don't think you need to worry anytime soon about upgrading your graphics card for sure. You might even be able to run those things or keep those things for another good 2-3 years before you'll actually get into a performance level where you're like, oh, okay, frame rates are getting low at 4K or whatever. So if you have any of that hardware, you're good. Don't really worry too much in the near future about upgrading. It makes sense. It's pretty new hardware if you have any of that. But if you're in the market of buying a new PC or a new gaming PC in particular, you might actually want to punch in that bracket, like get an 8-core 16-thread CPU and like especially if you're not planning to upgrade it anytime soon. If you just want value, get a 3600. Is perfect enough for now. Um, but if you're looking to buy something that will last for a long time, then absolutely make sure that you're trying to get something with 16 threads running at a decent clock speed. But anything that has 16 threads, other than some old Xeons, will be fine. Any current mainstream hardware. Let's put it that way. So 9900K, 3700X or above on the AMD side, and I think even if for now you're just getting an 8-core, 8-thread CPU, which I wouldn't recommend, but you're still fine. You're still more than fine with a 9700K. So but if you're buying new, try to get those 8 cores, 16 threads at least, and try to get a graphics card if you can afford it that punches in the same class as the 2080 Super if you're looking to keep it for a good few years. If you're just looking for value, get something that gets you by for now. Maybe get something used. I'm a big fan of getting used graphics cards. Not only is it good for reducing e-waste, it's also good for reducing graphics card prices because what's happening right now is still the market's inflated, the graphics card prices are inflated. People are buying 2080 Ti's left and right apparently. Uh, they wouldn't have that price tag if they wouldn't sell. They sell. People buy them. I don't understand. I guess people have too much money or the marketing just works. I honestly don't know. But $1,200 for a graphics card is, especially for the performance increase you get over, let's say, a 2080 Super. We're talking about like what is it, like 12, 13% more performance, I believe, for a good $400 more. That's insanity. But people still buy them. Either way, a topic for another day. Um, for now, just try, if you're building a new computer, 8 cores, 16 threads, something that's in the range of at least, I would say 1080 Ti or upwards. 1080 Ti, 2070 Super, 2080 Super. Don't buy a 2080 Ti, please. But if you get one used, cheap, somewhere, okay, why not? Or of course a 2080 if you get one used cheap somewhere. Don't buy it new, buy a Super instead. Um, or 2070 Super. Um, get 16 gigs of RAM. If you can, run them in, make sure it's a dual channel kit. Get that performance increase of the increased throughput. Yeah, and try to have an SSD to load your games off because I predict that game load times in the future, if you run them off an HDD or regular hard drive, spinning hard drive, will be atrocious. Because all modern games will have in mind that you have an SSD and your game is running off that SSD. So I think if you're on PC and you're gonna install games on a hard drive, we all know it's pretty bad right now, but it will get worse in my opinion. I mean, just look at some of the games. Look at the sizes of the games, which means the texture sizes are enormous, which gets loaded into VRAM, but it's getting loaded off your hard drive. So yeah, um, just keep that in mind that SSDs are the future, but don't buy into the whole. It has to be NVMe, and it doesn't have to be NVMe. And it definitely doesn't have to be NVMe PCIe 4.0 to be good. But of course, if you have the cash, spend the money. If it makes you feel happy, or you feel like you're future proofing with PCIe 4.0 storage. So I think those were my final words. Look at the future hardware. We have the leaks now. if you're buying a gaming PC right now, make sure you buy somewhere in that category if you're planning to keep it for a couple of years or 3, 4 years, maybe even. If you're planning to upgrade soon, just go for value. If you're planning to upgrade within the next 2 years, maybe, just go for whatever good value graphics cards you can get right now. Sell the old graphics card if it's still working, and get new hardware. Honestly, it's the same it has always been, but now we have a bit of an idea uh, where you should be shopping at if you're building for the long term. So I hope to see you again next time. This was Julian with Mainstream PC. I hope you like this kind of format of me just talking into my webcam. It's a little bit lower production quality, but I had to make do for today. So I hope to see you again soon. Bye.